Hi, everyone. Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Alicia Menendez. Calls are growing for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to lose his job over horrific conditions facing our service members aboard the USS Lincoln. The aircraft carrier has set a modern-day record for consecutive days at sea and has been deployed for nearly 9 months as part of President Trump's war of choice with Iran. Democratic Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says Hegseth must be fired immediately, and he is not alone. Here's what else we've heard, including from Congressman and veteran Jake Auchincloss on this show just yesterday. You have repeatedly called on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to resign if Democrats are to take back control of Congress. Will impeachment be a priority?
Yes, it should be. Absolutely. We need an inquiry. We need oversight and investigations. And if the facts yield an impeachment recommendation, we need to pursue that vigorously.
We on the Armed Services Committee want basic answers.
He doesn't want there to be any accountability. He doesn't want to get blamed. That's pretty obvious. He doesn't want this president to get blamed.
MS Now has reported on the absolute grim conditions our service members are facing on that ship. Moldy showers, food shortages, running out of toothpaste, deodorant, and soap. This is what our service members, people who are putting their lives on the line for us, are dealing with, and it is taking a toll. A sailor jumped overboard last week and was in water for about an hour before being rescued. The sailor's wife told MS Now that days earlier her husband texted her, quote, "I think the boat is finally getting to me, and I really don't think I can keep up my Peace Act anymore." Hegseth was asked about the dire moment for our service members. Take a listen.
Completely misrepresented. Listen, we make sure that every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment. Some deployments are longer than others, and I have more respect and gratitude for those sailors than anybody.
With the health and dignity of our troops on the line, I want to bring in MS Now reporter Priya Sridhar, who has been doing that incredible reporting for us. Vaughn Hilliard is still with us. I also want to bring in Amy McGrath, retired U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel and the founder of Democratic Majority Action PAC, and MS Now political analyst Tim Miller, host of the Bulwark podcast. Amy, what we just heard there from Secretary Hegseth, is that sufficient?
No, because nobody trusts Secretary Hegseth. He has an integrity problem. He's had that from the start. Look, there's always stresses of being on deployment, and the longer the tour, the harder it becomes. I think the conditions of being in a combat zone for such a long period of time during these conditions makes it very, very difficult for those sailors that are out there. Sailors, soldiers, and Marines enduring harsh conditions, frankly, is not new. What is new and what stands out to me is the anger and sense of betrayal that these sailors and their families feel about the mission itself. I don't ever remember seeing this level of pushback from military family members during our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq even. Families who are normally very supportive are they're questioning why their loved ones are being put at risk. What's the strategy? Why do we need to start this war? Do we have competent leaders at the top who have prepared our forces for a long-term battle? Because frankly, many of these service members were probably told, like the American people, that this campaign was only going to last a few weeks.
I mean, Tim, to the point that Amy's making, this is about a ship the way that Moby Dick is about a whale. The administration has not given these service members a clear rationale for why they are there in the first place. DOD isn't just responsible for the conditions of the ship. They are responsible for why these service members have been deployed. And that's the part, it seems to me, that Hegseth can't really contend with.
Yeah, there's no strategy and there's no exit plan. I was talking with Adam Kinzinger on the Bulwark yesterday, and he's like, look, maybe this would be different if it's like, hey, at Labor Day, we're going to rotate you guys out and we've got a plan to get a new carrier. There's none of that. Like, they have no strategy. They have no plan. The war was not pitched to anyone. It wasn't pitched to the American people, but it wasn't pitched to the, sailors, soldiers, airmen. Like, it was a completely ill thought out, stupid decision from the president on a whim because he thought it was going to be easy. He thought it was going to last a weekend. And here we are. And these sailors have been out there for 250 days. I mean, the usual kind of rotation where you at least go to port, and is every 30 to 45 days. This is way, way, way beyond that. So it's no surprise that the morale is low, and especially when there's no end in sight.
Right. And Priya, this is capturing the attention of members of Congress. California Senator Adam Schiff, who is from the same state as this ship, spoke about the conditions with our colleague, Peter Alexander. Take a listen to what they said.
We've had, I know, at least one family of someone aboard interact with our office and complain about the lack of food and the poor quality of food, saying that was certainly in terrible shape. And that was early on. So I can only imagine months later how much worse it is now.
Priya, we highlighted your reporting speaking to the wife of that sailor who jumped overboard. What else did she say to you about what's been going on there?
Yeah, that's right, Alicia. It was an absolutely heartbreaking story. This young woman is just 19 years old. She actually had a baby girl back in February while her husband was on this deployment. He actually got an opportunity to meet that baby for the first time before he was admitted to Balboa Naval Medical Center in San Diego after he was medically evacuated from the ship after he jumped overboard last Monday. She told me she wasn't entirely surprised that this happened because he had been expressing to her repeatedly during this deployment that he was exhausted. He was an aviation mechanic who worked on the aircraft carrier's flight deck, and he also expressed concerns about safety conditions there because he said that his prescription contact lenses had expired, and he expressed both of his mental health concerns and those safety concerns to his chain of command, she says, and to the ship's medical team, and she says that they just brushed it off. And what was even more concerning, Alicia, is she tells me that after she discovered his suicide attempt from one of his squadron mates back on Monday, she reached out to the Navy to find out more information, and they did not get back to her about anything until Friday, 5 days later. So yet again, it just shows a little bit of a lack of transparency here. And this is just one sailor's story of the 5,000 sailors who are on that aircraft carrier.
There can be a political shift, the attention necessary. You have a growing number of Democrats who are calling for Hegseth to either be fired or have raised the possibility of impeachment. At the same time, you've got political reporting. The Democratic candidates have made Hegseth a new boogeyman on the campaign trail. They're planning to shift their attacks from President Trump to Hegseth. I wonder sort of what you think about that strategy and what type of pressure it would take for the attention to really turn to Hegseth and his leadership. Amy, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think Hegseth should be a political target for Democrats because he is so incompetent. And it is putting our military at risk. It's putting our country at risk. I mean, his treatment of the military from the start has been terrible. You can talk about all the silly stuff, like the pulling down photos of diversity in the force or the ridiculous dressing down of the top military officers last year, the admirals and generals that he has not promoted because of their color or gender. But the biggest problem with Pete Hegseth is his incompetence and his lack of integrity. The military doesn't need to be coddled, doesn't need to be treated well even. But what the military needs is a Secretary of Defense who is competent at the top, who is going to make sure that he does the things that only the Secretary of Defense can do, like partnerships and making sure we don't get into a war where we're going to get clobbered strategically. Those are the big things. And the integrity piece is so important. This is a man who has lied about the Strait of Hormuz being open. He's lied about the operation. He's encouraged the military to perform war crimes. He's covered up the casualties of this war. People just don't believe him anymore, and that's why he needs to go.
Right, and Vaughn, what we're hearing from Amy's analysis is so fundamentally different from what we're hearing from President Trump, who's continued to support Hegseth publicly, says he has faith in him. Just take a listen.
The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, and he's had some good victories lately, I will tell you. He's going to have a lot more. Pete Hegseth, incredible. We have just a great group of people. Pete Hegseth, who was born for this role. I mean, he's doing a great job.
Okay, but fuller context here. You have the reporting that Trump's frustration with the Iran war boiled over at last week's Camp David summit, where he demanded answers on munition shortages. Hegseth was aboard that special decoy flight out of the Middle East, though unlike Trump, he did not sneak aboard. Why this enduring loyalty to Hegseth on the part of the president?
Pete Hegseth is still, Alicia, carrying out the orders of the president himself. This is a war that the president of the United States decided to go forward with and commanded his Pentagon to move forward with these offensive strikes on February 28th. This is something that Donald Trump has suggested would be able to be negotiated, and yet every step of the way, the fault of the continuousness of the war has not been the strategy in his mind, but it is the difficulty that is the Iranians' ability to maintain its offensive posture in keeping this war going. And I think that it goes back to people like Mark Esper and James Mattis from the first Trump administration, and the commitment by the transition team this go around to install people into these cabinet positions that would be unyieldingly loyal to him and his wishes. And that's exactly what he got in November of 2024 when he selected Pete Hegseth, right? He made it through narrowly through the confirmation process despite deep reservations from people like veteran Joni Ernst. And so in so many ways, what we're watching transpire now, the president really can't lay at the feet of Pete Hegseth. And I think that that is where the reporting from Priya and from our colleague Lindsay are so relevant to this moment, because it's human impact stories that are the ones that are hardest to spin. And understanding that soldiers are not in the position to speak out, and their family members are hesitant to do so as well, knowing the potential implications of an administration that has gone after individuals that they deem leakers or individuals who they deem to be seeking to undermine the mission of the American military. We saw them pull the national security credentials from the former Air Force secretary that served under the Biden administration for simply talking with the New York Times on the record about questions as it related to the new Air Force One. And so we have seen this Pentagon and this administration go after Alyssa Slotkin, go after Mark Kelly. And so there has been a very clear statement that has been made by Pete Hegseth on behalf of the president that they are willing to go after anybody that tries to undermine the mission of the U.S. military. And so for right now, he's a pretty good option that continues to exist despite the frustrations of the continuing war.
Tim, who is the bigger risk for Hegseth, the president growing frustrated with him or Democrats seeking to impeach him?
The president. And, look, I think there are a couple of ways to look at why there is not more buzz about moving on from Pete Hegseth around MAGA circles. It's not as if they have not been willing to push aside people in this cabinet who have not performed well. It has tended to all be women, is something that I guess would be noteworthy, whether that be Kristi Noem or Tulsi Gabbard or Pam Bondi. So the administration and Trump himself has moved on from people. So the fact that he's not, given just the plain failures that anybody who has eyes can see, leads you to wonder a couple things. I mean, maybe it's as simple as Vaughn was saying. Pete Hegseth is just carrying out Trump's orders, and for Trump to move on from Hegseth would be for Trump to look inside himself and talk about his own and reflect on his own mistakes, which is not something that Donald Trump does. So maybe it's as simple as that. I think a more ominous potential that we should at least think about is, I think the other person I would look at who's extremely incompetent, who is staying in this administration despite tons of terrible press, is Kash Patel. And maybe Donald Trump has decided he wants pliable, less than competent people in those roles, given what might happen in the coming years. I think maybe he looks back at the way that Mark Esper did not exceed his demands about shooting protesters in the leg or the Insurrection Act at the end of his first term and think he doesn't want someone like that in there. And he'd rather have somebody incompetent and pliable. I think that is also a real possibility.
Good evening from New York. I'm Antonia Hilton in tonight for Chris Hayes. Every day, the immense financial and moral costs of Donald Trump's war come into sharper and sharper view. All week long, we've been telling you about the saga of the USS Abraham Lincoln, one of the biggest symbols of American military might, whose 5,000 sailors and Marines are in crisis, at war, and at sea since last November. Their tour extended twice, no port calls, no land. Families tell MS Now the crew has gone hungry, without showers or mail, basic toiletries or hot water or drinkable water for long, long stretches, as the fleet can't keep up with the increased logistics of an open-ended war. And many service members are in a mental health crisis. multiple Lincoln sailors have jumped or attempted to jump overboard. The wife of one showed MS Now a text in which her husband wrote in the days before he jumped, "The boat is finally getting to me." The mother of another sailor told MS Now that the problem is not the ship, it's their leaders.
What I want people to know is how would you feel if that was your kid over there, right? And I've heard people say this about Trump and his son. Send your son over there if this is all okay to you. And I don't disagree with them. How would you feel if that was your son over there? How would you feel if this was you over there?
Where is the president on all of this? Yesterday, we heard from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who denied there were any problems on board the Lincoln, a claim directly undercut, by the way, by the fact the Navy prepared to redirect another aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, from its station in the Pacific to relieve the Lincoln, a move that will then mean that the U.S. has no carriers left behind in the Pacific for the foreseeable future. So every choice, big and small, made by this administration in the midst of this war comes with a cost. Have those costs registered with Hegseth's boss, the commander-in-chief, though. Trump hasn't been as eager as usual to perform for reporters and the cameras in recent weeks, and perhaps that's because he gets questions about this war anytime he gets in front of a mic. Remember, people around him say that he's been getting bored with this war that he started. Earlier this week, he was telling Axios that he's, quote, low-keying it. But today on the tarmac, Trump stopped in front of the cameras to talk up the economy, and he could not avoid a reporter's questions about the USS Lincoln.
I have a lot of things that are happening, a lot of good things. The economy is doing unbelievably from the standpoint of Wall Street. We have a record stock market. 401ks have set a new record. What else do I have to say?
Family members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
No, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment gone on too long? Are you worried about the mental health concerns?
Not nearly long enough. Thank you, everybody.
Not nearly long enough, says the president. Hegseth indicating a military blockade of Iranian ports could go on indefinitely. The thing is, ships require maintenance. Munitions get depleted and destroyed. Sailors, human beings, need to go home. So you have to ask, does this president care about the costs? Or does he only care about getting something that resembles a win, or at least the fantasy version of a win that exists in his mind, which he shared on stage, by the way, at a political rally in Long Island today.
And after we finish defeating Iran, which is being very badly defeated, pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States.
Pretty soon, until then, whenever that is, well, Trump has other priorities for now. Today, his Solicitor General made an emergency plea to the Supreme Court to let the Trump ballroom construction move forward in a filing that described the structure as an integrated military complex, vitally required by national security. It also cited a Trump post promising his ballroom would be, quote, one of the most beautiful of its kind anywhere in the country. More vital than, say, making sure the crew of the Abraham Lincoln has food and clean living quarters? Trump may not show much interest in the plight of his service members, but at some point, something has got to give. Because remember, the Iran war is only part of a much bigger picture. The Trump administration is stretching the American military across the globe, asking them to do more, for longer, in more places, with fewer rules and constraints, with no need often for justification, from striking boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific to invading a sovereign country and kidnapping their president, all to dominate this hemisphere. Earlier this week, the State Department posted a 5-minute-long video praising the Monroe Doctrine with the tagline, "American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again." And the next day, Hegseth was publicly planning joint strikes on armed groups in Colombia.
When trouble happens, like in Colombia or Venezuela, we're the first ones to show up. We're going to bring those beautiful Chinooks and C-17s chock full of experts and supplies. And that's what we've done in Colombia, and that's what we've done in Venezuela. But Colombia is going to be an incredible partner.
There is a lot going on here. But perhaps this is what it looks and sounds like when your military is materially drained, but your leadership is completely morally unconstrained. And all the usual limiting mechanisms like your members of Congress, international law, they're at best an afterthought and aside as Trump plows ahead on a range of pursuits from the Persian Gulf to the Panama Canal and maybe soon Cuba. This administration is acting as though American military prowess has no physical or legal limits, even though our military, and more importantly, the people who comprise it, absolutely do. David Shulkin is a physician who served as Secretary of Veteran Affairs in the first Trump administration and is Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs for Health under President Obama. And he joins us now. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you this evening. I want to begin with your broad take on what is happening to the thousands of service members aboard the USS Lincoln right now.
Well, look, it's very difficult to watch this, and we all need to take this seriously. The conditions in which our men and women are serving not only on the U.S. Abraham Lincoln, 5,000 sailors, but frankly, 50,000 of our military are deployed in the contact zones and the conflict that's in the Middle East. All of them are experiencing a new type of warfare, the warfare of missiles and of drones, and that really is taking a toll on our military members, and these prolonged deployments are of significant concern. So we need to take this seriously. We need to get in there and make an assessment. And for those that are suffering, we need to be able to get them out of that area and get the help that they need. But action is definitely required. We also have frankly seen this before. In the Iraq and Afghanistan war, we know that 15 to 25% of those who served in those conflict areas come back and eventually will experience a behavioral health issue, and some of them extremely serious, leading to people taking their own lives.
So what do you imagine the family members, the loved ones of these service members feel and hear when the president says something standing on that tarmac, like he did earlier today, saying that this deployment was not nearly long enough?
Yeah, when I listen to the family members and we hear from them, I really take that seriously. One of the things that you have to understand when a son or daughter, husband, wife, brother, sister are serving, it's really that whole family that's serving. And this type of concern for the family member is with people all day long. And I have spent lots of time with these family members. These are patriotic families that want to support their service member who is volunteering and sacrificing for the country, but they want to see them being safe and they don't want to see them suffering. So I think that hearing from these family members that are generally among the most supportive and patriotic of our missions, particularly overseas, when we hear them showing this type of concern, we need to take that seriously.
I want you to take a listen to a White House spokesperson who spoke on Fox earlier about all this because of the way in which this administration, chiefly the president himself and Hegseth, seem to just be brushing off, even at times outright denying what service members are coming forward and telling the press. Take a listen to this.
Is the president concerned that these sailors and these ships are staying at sea far longer than they normally do?
Well, John, I think this president cares about our United States military service members, our troops, more than everybody. Remember Joe Biden, who unfortunately shifted the focus on our away from our war fighters and onto these woke DEI policies.
So you hear the spokesperson there going back to the Biden administration, bringing up DEI, which I don't think has anything to do with what's unfolding here and the needs of the service members and their families aboard this ship right now. Does this administration, does the Pentagon owe people a more direct answer about what they're going to do for them?
Yeah. Well, I've had the privilege of talking directly to President Trump, to President Biden, to President Obama, and other presidents who have been commander-in-chief. And I have to tell you, I think almost to every single one of them does honor and respect and know the sacrifice of our men and women. But I do think that the White House needs to acknowledge the conditions and that we can be doing more to support our sailors and those who are in this conflict zone. And I think we heard that from the Secretary of the Navy, who came out and acknowledged some of the shortcomings and acknowledged that we need to be doing more. They are going to be sending more resilience counselors. They are sending a new aircraft carrier to try to relieve the U.S. Abraham Lincoln. And so it is important to be able to make sure that you're listening and hearing from those that are serving and making sure that you're acknowledging and acting in order to respond to what is a pretty serious situation.
Yeah, it's an incredibly serious situation. And I want to push on one thing there. I understand you've spoken to all of these presidents and, Americans across the board, across the political spectrum have immense respect for the sacrifice that service members and their family members make. But I think people are wondering right now about this administration, just how seriously they do see that sacrifice when we've seen throughout the week them being unwilling to grapple with the gravity here, at times denying claims that service members were even attempting to jump overboard, something that numerous news outlets, including us here at MS Now, we've been able to talk to people and confirm that these mental health crises are real. And so I guess when you see this administration and their actions in recent days, do you get the sense that they just don't actually know the facts? They don't know the truth, and that's why they're having trouble acknowledging it? Or is there some sense in which they don't care?
Yeah, I do think that this administration recognizes the seriousness, particularly of behavioral health issues, but I think that they're struggling with trying to acknowledge that publicly and wanting to show strength, especially to our enemies. But the most important thing that one can do to support our men and women and to keep that readiness and morale up there is to acknowledge and be transparent about not only what's going on and what's the current situation, but what are you going to do to respond to that? How are you going to be there to support? And I think that there is an opportunity for the administration to step up and to demonstrate that commitment, which I do believe is there. But right now, if you're a sailor or anybody else serving under these tough conditions, that's what you need to hear. You need to hear leaders that are connected to the current situation and leaders that are willing to acknowledge problems when they exist and what they're going to do about it. And I think all of this coverage is actually important to be able to get the American public to show that support as well.
We are now 169 days into Donald Trump's war in Iran. And what we still don't know is how long is it going to last? And what is the cost to the American service members being asked to fight it? 18 service members have been killed in the 169 days since Trump's war began. And the USS Abraham Lincoln, based at Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, has been deployed for nearly 9 months. No port calls, no chance to touch land or see loved ones. And we're hearing increasingly disturbing reports about the conditions aboard the carrier for the 5,000 sailors and Marines, including broken toilets, food shortages, an intensifying mental health crisis, and sailors who still don't have a clear sense of when they're coming home. And the reality is there's no clear picture of when they can come home because there's no clear end to this spiraling conflict. And there was never a clear, convincing story for why this administration started it. Today, Acting Secretary of the Navy, Hung Cao, said in a statement, quote, "The USS Abraham Lincoln crushed their deployment and will return home soon as part of a planned rotation. Details will come, but let me be clear. The safety and security of our sailors and Marines always comes first. Mission accomplished, troop welfare. This is how we lead." Unfortunately, the media are trying to paint our warriors as victims. Not only is that dishonest, but it takes away the focus on the enemy and the threat it poses against our nation, people, and way of life. Acting Navy Secretary Cao continues saying, quote, "It is also true a small number of mental health cases were treated with no loss of life. Meal plans were adjusted when fresh resupply was unavailable without a single meal being missed. Calls home were limited when the operational threat was too high." It is worth underlining there that the Trump administration is proud of the fact that active duty service members deployed in Trump's war, American service members in 2026, they're receiving regular meals without a single meal being missed. A very low bar. The acting secretary's statement comes after MS Now reported, quote, a sailor who jumped off the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier last week was in water for about an hour before he was rescued, his wife told MS Now on Thursday in an exclusive interview. The wife, who was granted anonymity to describe sensitive mental health issues, says she was not contacted by Navy officials about the incident until 4 days after her husband jumped off the ship on August 3rd. In the last text exchanges she had with her husband on July 21st, before he went overboard, messages she shared with MS Now, her husband said he felt the boat was finally getting to him. One text message read, I think the boat is finally getting to me, and I really don't think I can keep up my peace act anymore. You are right about it all not being okay. We were supposed to leave Fifth Fleet on July 15th, but then something had to come up, and my last hope of being home soon was gone. I'm really trying to not feel negative or hopeless. But between the Wi-Fi and not knowing when I will come home and not knowing what is happening back home, it's really getting me. I really don't think I can do another deployment after this, and I don't even know if I can finish this deployment. The wife said her husband went to his chain of command and the medical team on that ship and expressed concerns about his mental health and reportedly told them he was not doing okay. The wife said her husband said they kept brushing him off. Donald Trump today said he doesn't think those American service members fighting his war in Iran have been out there long enough.
I have to say,
family members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
well, no, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment's gone on too long?
No. Not nearly long enough. Thank you, everybody.
Congressman Jason Crow, who served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan before being elected to the House of Representatives, was furious on social media. President Trump does not care about our service members or their families. Our next guest, California Democratic Congressman Mike Levin, has been pressing the Pentagon and the Navy for answers. Congressman Levin sent a letter yesterday to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the acting Navy Secretary demanding answers about the conditions aboard USS Abraham Lincoln. He will join us in a moment on that. But here's what Donald Trump did today, on the 169th day of his war in Iran. Today, Trump asked the Supreme Court to intervene so that construction of his ballroom, which the Washington Post says is estimated to cost $600 million, mostly from taxpayers, can continue. Trump's Solicitor General John Sauer wrote in his filing that a, quote, 250-person crew is working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep the project ahead of schedule and under budget. Today, the project is 65% complete in its entirety and moving quickly toward total completion. That follows Donald Trump taking time to join the Kennedy Center board meeting, too, yesterday to push through a vote to somehow put his name back on that building. Donald Trump, a wartime president, continues to be completely focused on the progress of a ballroom and on putting his name on a building. And it's not really just the buildings. Now, Trump is also weighing in on the design of future aircraft carriers for some reason. Trump ordered the Navy to bring back steam catapults on future aircraft carriers. That's completely outdated technology the Navy has moved away from in favor of course, newer electromagnetic systems. The Wall Street Journal reports that it's a move Navy officials have been fighting for years and that it will likely cost billions of dollars. And how did Donald Trump, who never served in the Navy at all and who's not an engineer, make this decision? Well, the Journal reports by doing so, Trump is making good on a promise he made almost 10 years ago to go back to the steam system after hearing a sailor praise it while visiting a ship during his first term. So he heard some sailor praise it a decade ago. At least he's doing his research. Here's what Senator Mark Kelly told my colleague Jen Psaki about this last night.
I was a test pilot that worked in certifying the takeoff and landing systems for aircraft carriers, and I have a master's degree in aeronautical engineering and a bachelor's degree in marine engineering. Not in any world would I ever suggest to the Navy to change the design of some system on a ship at this point. I mean, does the guy know nothing about the way our government is supposed to work and how it's supposed to be managed? For him to get in these details, especially with his background, I mean, what is his background? He's a marginally failed real estate developer, right, with multiple bankruptcies. He shouldn't be weighing in on systems on aircraft carriers.
And what else did the, quote, marginally failed real estate developer with multiple bankruptcies, to borrow a phrase from Senator Kelly there, do today? He told American voters it's okay if they have to pay $4 a gallon for gas.
For you to pay a tiny little bit more for your gasoline, just remember, you're doing it so that a very evil country cannot have a country. Really, it's the number one state sponsor of terror in the world. We don't want to have them have a nuclear weapon. So remember that when you have to pay a little bit more, you're at $4. It's okay. I mean, it's I'll never apologize. I did the right thing.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Mike Levin of California. He's a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Congressman, it's good to see you this evening. I want to begin with, of course, I want to begin with what you're hearing about the conditions on the USS Abraham Lincoln from people that you have spoken to.
Well, you laid it out very well. I'm hearing from family members who are deeply concerned about the conditions. And just to be very clear, none of us expect for an aircraft carrier to be the Holiday Inn. We're not talking about, some sort of luxury lifestyle here. Our sailors and Marines expect hard conditions at times, but they also expect basic habitability. And that just gets down to readiness, being ready and prepared for whatever the mission is. The second thing I hear from our family members is that it's very unclear what the mission really is. When you have the President of the United States who's saying we've won the war in Iran a dozen times, well, at the same time, Secretary Hegseth basically calls the concerns of family members fake news. The Navy Secretary, I don't even know if the President has spoken to the Navy Secretary. He had a meeting with around 200 military families in San Diego about a week ago where those concerns were laid out very specifically to him. And I don't know if Hung Cao has even briefed Donald Trump, because today to hear the totally cavalier attitude of the president was a shocking comment even for him. We've been accustomed to very, very shocking comments, but this one's right up there. It's really just a horrible situation for all involved.
81 days until the midterms. I'm Catherine Rampell, sitting in for my friend and colleague Ali Velshi. There is some very welcome news tonight for the 5,000-member crew aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. That's the aircraft carrier stationed in the Middle East, fighting Donald Trump's war of choice against Iran. The United States Navy is now sending a different aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, to potentially relieve the USS Lincoln of its duties and send its crew back home. For the sailors on board the USS Lincoln, it has been a long and a grueling 9 months of deployment. In the 266 days since it left its home port of San Diego, its crew has only had the chance to spend 2 days on dry land. The morale on board has deteriorated amid dire food and supply shortages and these unsanitary living conditions. One young man jumped overboard, and others have reportedly attempted to do the same. But it's not just the crew members aboard the USS Lincoln who have been suffering. Their loved ones back here in America have felt somewhat helpless as the complaints about life on board have piled up. During in-person and virtual meetings with Navy officials last week, many family members aired their grievances and pleaded for information on when the crew would return home. Some people were, quote, in tears asking leaders what was being done to address issues of mental health and exhaustion. One mother shared that her daughter told her that she, quote, believes she is going to die on the ship. In an account from the publication Stars and Stripes, one woman said that she received a message from her husband saying that, quote, he hopes he doesn't wake up tomorrow. Another attendee summed it up this way. They told Navy officials that the military had, quote, broken trust between us and leadership. And when asked today about the growing list of concerns regarding the physical and mental well-being of these service members, here's what Donald Trump had to say.
Family members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
Well, no, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Has the deployment's gone on too long?
No. Not nearly long enough.
That is on top of the comment that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave yesterday, claiming that the U.S. can keep its naval blockade, quote, indefinitely. So when the USS Lincoln appears like it's headed home soon, the Trump administration is not really giving any assurances the blockade itself is coming to an end at any point. And during his speech at a police academy in Long Island this afternoon, Trump said that he had even bigger plans for the Strait of Hormuz. Listen.
And after we finish defeating Iran, which is being very badly defeated, pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States.
Look, Trump is facing a lot of problems right now that he has driven his approval numbers to all-time lows. Many of his own voters have expressed disapproval over his war with Iran and the economic toll it has taken here at home on Americans. The war has led to a spike in threats, including last month when he was reportedly secretly whisked away from an Air Force One jet via an airport catering truck onto a different plane due to a threat on his life from Iran. One senior Secret Service official told MS Now that Trump is now the focus of more threats than any modern president. And because of that, the Secret Service has gone as far as to request that the military install an anti-aircraft missile launcher at Trump's golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey, which is where Trump plans to spend this weekend. Joining me now to discuss are MS Now Pentagon reporter Priya Sridhar and MS Now senior national security reporter David Rode. So, Priya, before we get started, I want to embarrass you a little bit for a moment because Priya and I have known each other since we were kids, and I just want our audience to know how amazing this woman is. She, just a few months ago, had a baby, got a master's degree, I think her second master's degree, is that right?
It was my second one, Catherine. Thanks for embarrassing me.
and now she is breaking these fantastic, really important stories that are of great meaning to our service members and those of us back home who are being protected by them. So Priya, let's talk about your story last week, now that I've embarrassed you, about the meeting between military families and Navy officials. You noted, quote, Acting Navy Secretary Hung Cao said that the aircraft carrier USS George Washington was not considered an option for replacing the Lincoln because the U.S. has to have a presence in the South Pacific, and there were operational commitments it had there. Initially, they said that the USS Theodore Roosevelt would be sent to replace the USS Lincoln. So how did this come to happen?
Yeah, Catherine, this is a super fascinating development because many of the families at that town hall were asking the acting secretary of the Navy, Hung Cao, why can't we send the USS George Washington to the Middle East? Because it would obviously get there much faster than the Roosevelt. And Hung Cao basically told them, well, we can't do that because we have to leave an aircraft carrier in the Indo-Pacific area as essentially a deterrent to some of the United States adversaries like China, North Korea, and Russia. So they were just going to have to wait a little bit longer and wait for the Roosevelt. But it seems like right now, the leadership and the administration is scrambling, trying to relieve the Lincoln and sort of get rid of this bad publicity that they're receiving because these service members are really struggling. But this is really going to have a domino effect, Catherine. I know that we've been talking a lot about the depletion of stockpiles of weapons and the fact that Tehran and Moscow and Beijing are watching that extremely closely. Well, you can bet that Beijing is going to be watching this as a potential another opportunity. This is really leaving the United States in a vulnerable position, moving this aircraft carrier away from that region into the Middle East.
David, Acting Navy Secretary Hung Cao described these changes as, quote, a planned rotation. But based on what we're hearing from Priya's reporting and others, it doesn't sound like the military was prepared to do this now. What are the risks of the U.S. having limited or no naval presence in the South Pacific?
It's China. In short, I met with some U.S. intelligence officials recently and asked them, how much do they think China was helping Iran, and then would they make a move on Taiwan? The feeling, initially was that China was sort of happy to sit back and watch the Trump administration mismanage this war, and they haven't seen indications yet that China would try to, take control of Taiwan. That would be an incredibly dramatic development, but you just don't know. As the administration sort of is moving, as Priya said, it's a surprise that they've now made this decision to move the one carrier out of that area that sort of protects Taiwan. So that could create an opportunity for China. You said it yourself, Catherine, the lack of planning from beginning to end, that has been the problem, and the planning for sort of worst case scenarios. Clearly, this administration never thought this war would last 6 months, and here we are.
Priya, we've been talking about the acting Navy secretary. He posted a statement on X earlier today. It read in part, quote, "Unfortunately, the media are trying to paint our warriors as victims. Not only is that dishonest, but it takes away the focus on the enemy and the threat it poses against our nation, people, and way of life," unquote. The administration has been dismissive of some of these reports, but it's obviously a serious matter for the sailors and their families. Have you gotten any reaction from any of the family members about comments like this, or the news that the USS Washington is heading to the Middle East?
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. I can say that I received so many text messages when Hung Kao first posted that on social media, and we subsequently saw Sean Parnell, also the chief spokesperson for the Pentagon, also tweeting, and then also Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth himself. They all had very similar messaging, blaming the media, of course, for characterizing these family members and these service members as victims. And I would say the overall, if I were to paraphrase the emotions of the family members that I've spoken to about all of that, was they feel honestly as though they're being gaslit. But at the same time, they're so excited to hear this news about the Washington moving into the Middle East, which is going to potentially relieve the Lincoln. So they want to focus on that piece of news right now. They're extremely hopeful because just about a week ago, before I started reporting about all of this, they felt extremely abandoned by this administration. They felt as though their 5,000 loved ones who were sailing around in that ship had essentially been forgotten about, and that no one cared about the conditions that they were suffering in fighting this war. So I think they're happy that all of this reporting has put a lot of pressure on this administration to do something and to bring these service members home.
David, let me play you another comment that President Trump made this afternoon about the Iran war. Take a listen.
For you to pay a tiny little bit more for your gasoline, just remember, you're doing it so that a very evil country cannot have a country. Really, it's the number one state sponsor of terror in the world. We don't want to have them have a nuclear weapon. So remember that when you have to pay a little bit more, you're at $4. It's okay. I mean, it's I'll never apologize. I did the right thing.
So, David, I spoke with Congressman Seth Moulton last night, and he made this point that service members can lose motivation if they don't know or they don't understand what they are fighting for. Can you talk to us a little bit about the overall morale in the military in regard to Iran and the president's incoherent messaging around it?
I'll talk about the president's incoherent message. I think Priya knows better in terms of morale, but I think it's a lack of strategy. And just so the statement there, he's gone back to we're going to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. There's no plan for how that would actually happen, at least in the short term. It's, the demands have gone from, help is on the way, was what President Trump said when the war was announced, to Iran had to give up its stockpile of enriched uranium, to Iran, please open the Strait of Hormuz. So at this point, the United States can't even get, the Trump administration can't get tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. 2 more tankers were fired on today. They were from the United Arab Emirates by the Iranians. And so the president, the problem, too, is he keeps making these sweeping statements. He's made them for months, and they've sort of lost their power, I think, in terms of pressuring Iran. So I still don't understand the clear strategy. There's some hope that an economic blockade will, change things, but this is a very repressive government in Iran, and it can withstand a lot of economic pain, and many of its people suffer, though, as a result.
So, Priya, could you talk a little bit to the morale question and to what extent some of the exhaustion and mental stress that we are seeing or that you're reporting on is related to sort of the lack of understanding of what this mission is? Does that matter? I mean, you served yourself as a naval officer. Does it matter for our service members if there isn't a clear objective?
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. And, it was interesting because Sean Parnell, when he posted on X today, he talked about some of the own deployments that he's been on. And of course, Acting Secretary of the Navy Hung Cao also served in the Navy himself. But I think what we have to remember right now is this was not a standard deployment. This aircraft carrier hit a modern day record for the most number of continuous days at sea. 208 days it didn't make a port call. Typically, aircraft carriers stop at port anywhere from 30 to 45 days. And I can tell you, as someone who wore a uniform, who's been on an aircraft carrier, many of my closest friends in the world are people who have served and gone on multiple deployments. Knowing that you're going to have a little bit of a break, that's what you're constantly counting down to in your head. And so when your deployment keeps getting extended, you're following the news on your phone, you're trying to understand what is the end state here? What is the objective? You start to see that perhaps there isn't one. And then when the president is making these comments that, oh, we can just have, this naval blockade indefinitely, I think that's very alarming to many people. And many of the family members that I spoke with said that they voted specifically for President Trump because he said he wasn't going to get our United States military involved in any sort of forever war. So I do think that service members really do follow the politics and the policy very closely because it impacts their lives so closely. There are so many service members on there who haven't even met their babies who were born on these deployments. They're living in limbo, trying to figure out when they're going to move to Washington State so that they can enroll their kids in school. It's not even just about these 5,000 service members. It's the ripple effect that's affecting all of their loved ones all across the country.
I want to bring in Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee and is a U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, and I want to start by thanking Priya for her service. We should be thanking all of these men and women on board that ship for their service today. And she's absolutely right. I mean, there will be long-term consequences of this. And there are also strategic consequences. We're not talking enough about the bigger picture here, which is that we continue to divert resources to a losing war. The George Washington is coming from another station to relieve this ship. This administration clearly had no plan going into the war and no clue how to get out of it.
I mentioned you served in the Marines. When you hear what the president had to say, that the USS Lincoln deployment has not been long enough, what's your reaction?
Typical from a draft dodger. Not a surprise. He's going to spend his weekend at his luxury golf course not thinking one bit about the troops who he's put in harm's way for a war of choice that he and Hegseth are losing. And, there's another piece of this, too, which is that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines can do extraordinary things in horrific conditions. But it really helps if you believe in the mission. It really helps. When I was a platoon commander on the ground in Iraq, one of the toughest questions I ever got, Jacob, in my life was, sir, why are we risking our lives for this? And that's got to be a question that a lot of sailors aboard the Abraham Lincoln are asking today. Why are we risking our lives for this? A war that's been a total disaster, that's actually backfired because Iran literally is projecting more power today than they ever have in history. Never has the Islamic Republic controlled the entire world economy like they do today. That's got to be incredibly disillusioning for these sailors.
Your point is so well taken, and I actually talked to a former colleague of mine who was a sailor and said he served during Operation Enduring Freedom, and he said we believed in what we were doing. So yeah, we were out there; it was grueling, but we were on board with the mission. And I'm paraphrasing here; I don't want to put words in this person's mouth, but what must it be like to be out there with no end in sight, with no understanding of what we're actually doing? I did want to read to you what the acting Secretary of the Navy said in this statement about the Lincoln. I believe it was just earlier in the week. This is what the quote says. It says, the Lincoln was extended because the mission demanded it. Deployments are hard. Combat operations make them harder. You know, it also said a leader's responsibility is to take care of their people the best they can while balancing mission requirements. During this deployment, we have seen both. The job is getting done. Our leaders are taking care of people. It sure doesn't seem like the leadership is taking care of our service members.
No, the president, the commander-in-chief, is more worried about his golf game this weekend. Secretary Hegseth has been in the jungle filming promo videos when he should be aboard the Abraham Lincoln, understanding exactly what's going on. The Navy secretary seems totally out of touch with reality here. And of course, none of these people, none of this chain of command has any clue how to end this war. And that's a real problem here. We're using up munitions. We're diverting resources from other places. This is actually why I put a requirement into the defense bill this year for INDOPACOM, where we should have a lot of assets to prevent and deter conflict with China. They need to report on what the impacts of these wars of choice in Venezuela and in Iran are having on our strategic safety and stability everywhere else in the world. This is dangerous not just for the troops, sailors aboard the Abraham Lincoln, but for all of our forces, because our deterrence is at risk because we're stuck in another war of choice in the Middle East thanks to Donald Trump.
What do you make of the USS Washington leaving the Pacific to potentially relieve the Lincoln? I mean, we talked about that it would leave the Pacific uncovered for the first time in decades. What kind of danger do you see that posing to our national security?
I mean, Jacob, we don't talk about this enough because it's an uncomfortable conversation. But the single biggest risk to the entire world is that China starts a war over Taiwan. That they start a war because they think we're distracted somewhere else. And it literally turns into World War III. A lot of the war games have it going nuclear. Yeah. And without getting into all the details, that is the biggest risk. Like, if you ask me, Seth, what are you most concerned about for your 5-year-old and 7-year-old at home? It's literally a war with China. That would change the world, end the world as we know it today. And our continued presence for decades in the Pacific has helped prevent that from happening. So we don't know what's going to go on. We don't know how emboldened China might be or how other adversaries around the world might be. But this is a dream come true for Xi Jinping, that we're tied down in another war in the Middle East, that we've expended all of our munitions, that troop morale is sagging, that the American public says enough is enough. This is an invitation for conflict elsewhere. And the number one job our troops ever do every single day is not fight wars, but prevent them, deter them from happening. And they're being distracted from their mission by this stupid war in the Middle East.
Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, candidate for U.S. Senate. I so appreciate you being here today. Indispensable. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Jacob.
Thanks. I want to add, by the way, if you or someone you know is in crisis, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide Crisis Lifeline or chat live at 988lifeline.org.